Thank you, Pamela. Thank you, Listra, and to DuPont as a whole for having me here and for talking this crowd here through the Global Food Security Index. I'm very happy to be at this event and to be debating this really interesting and important topic. If you've missed, and I assume most of you on this side have missed the slides that Pat put up because the screen's a bit small, I was hoping we'd get a screen the size of this billboard at the back. Everything is on this website, and if you want to put down the URL, it's foodsecurityindex.eiu.com. Everything I'm going to tell you today, everything that Pat has told you today, you can find it on this website. And I'm just going to show you, demonstrate how you can navigate through it, and then there's also a tool in Excel that can be downloaded from the website, which has the mechanics of the index and the raw data in case you want to pull that for your own research. So let's start with the basic navigation. We have 6 tabs at the top, an overview of the scores. We have a country profile so you can deep dive into individual countries. The key findings are summarized in short copies. The methodology, in case you want to know, well, what does this specific indicator actually mean? You can look it up here. And then the sources of the data. If you feel that's something I want to use for my own research, but the data here only goes back 2 years and you want to go back 20 years, you'll find the sources under sources. Let's start with the overview, because I find this website actually very neat, and I'm going to promote the EU a bit by mentioning that it won a prize in the US in 2011 for its design. I'm only hoping that the internet cooperates and it loads fast enough. Okay, it's not really cooperating. Just give it another second or two. Otherwise, I'll just switch to the Excel tool. Okay, I'm going to give up on the website. So there is an Excel tool on the website which you can download under Overview. The overview has also a very neat scatter plot. The scatter plot shows the overall scores within the index on the y-axis. On the x-axis, it shows several other indicators which you can correlate it with. So you'll find that the overall score correlates quite neatly with overall wealth, GDP per capita. But there are some outliers. You'll find that the likes of Switzerland or the likes of France lie slightly above or below that line. I think that's attributable to personal taste. I think France is known for its culinary history, and they invest much more money, much more time into food, and so on a per household basis also spend much more on food. Whereas in Switzerland you have pretty much the opposite, and that's why they're outliers. But they still fall within that overall trend of GDP and food security. What you have on display now on the screen is the map, which I wanted to show you online, but I'm now showing you in Excel. Unfortunately, it's very small, so I'm going to have to describe it a little bit. The countries in green are those that score the best within the index. And we have 4 groups here. We call them best environment, good environment, which is a very pale yellow. I'm not sure you'll be able to see it, but they're actually the countries of Eastern Europe, including Russia, China, Kazakhstan. You have Saudi Arabia within that group, Iran. Most of Latin America fall into good environment. Then we have a category called moderate environment, which encompasses South Asia, Indonesia, and 3 to 4 countries in Latin America. The countries that need most improvement, as Pat has mentioned, are in sub-Saharan Africa, but there are also some in Asia, such as Nepal, I believe, and Laos. So this is the overall score. What I like to do next when I look at an index is understand, well, what actually goes into this. What indicators build up this index? And there's a tab in here which we call weights. It's not intuitive if you're not familiar with the structure of these workbooks, but what it does is it lists the indicators within the index and also shows the weights attributed to each one of these indicators. What's also nice about this tool is that you can change the weights. You can completely disagree with the expert panel that we consulted for this project and who have given these weights, which are not immediately intuitive, at least not for me. Affordability, 40%, availability, 44%, quality and safety, 16%. Me not being an expert on the topic, I thought, where did they come from? From a panel, an expert panel who we consulted, and they awarded the corresponding importance to the individual indicators and then the three categories that make up the index. If you want to change that, you can go into the yellow-colored cells and just overwrite the values in there, and you can end up with a completely different index. If you wanted to push France into first, you would probably have to eliminate indicators such as how much do they spend on food as a share of household expenditure, because that's where they spend more than many other developing countries. So this is where you can find the breakdown, and you'll see we have quite a lot of indicators in here. It's a long list of over 30, I believe. And you can also see the individual performance by indicator on a sheet called indicator ranking. That's a bit more intuitive in terms of name. If we look at affordability, for example, you'll see that US, I say you see, I mean those over here. For those on my left, I'll read it out to you. So US comes first overall in the overall index. But on affordability, it's trumped by Singapore. Singapore comes first on that measure. Breaking it down into individual indicators, I've also been tasked to talk and to stress the indicators that give a reflection on the resilience of a country. So within affordability, you have, I'd say, two which immediately spring to mind when we talk about resilience. One of them is sort of more of a short-term indicator, and that would be food consumption as a share of household expenditure. What does that mean? How much does each household basically spend on food as a share of its overall expenditure? So the other outlays can be rent, they can be school tuition, going out to watch a film, whatsoever. And on this measure, as I already alluded to before, Switzerland spends a bit less money than, say, other countries. So the hard data here, which you have further to the right, you have the score right next to the country name. Then you have the raw data, is 7%. Let's see if I can find the other country I mentioned. In France, for example, they spend 22% of their household expenditure on food, which to me does not only reflect how much money they have in their pockets, but also a question of cultural differences. Something that's also very nice about this is that we can highlight regions. So if we wanted to see how sub-Saharan Africa does on this particular index, for those who are close to the screen, you'll see one country has highlighted in what should be orange on the screen, and that's South Africa, which comes 13th on this measure. They spend 17.8% of their household expenditure on food. But you don't find any other, so I'm going to scroll down looking for the rest of the sub-Saharan African countries, and as you'll see, they're further towards the bottom of the list. If I pick up the country we're in right now, in Ethiopia, 50% of household expenditure goes to food. If you compare that to Switzerland, that is quite a difference. Bottom of the list are Nepal and Cambodia, which spend over 70% of their household expenditure on food. obviously, the more you spend on food, the less resilient you're going to be, because any price shock to that basket of goods is going to affect you heavily. However, if only 7% of your expenditure goes into food, you're going to feel it less. Another indicator, which I think is worth mentioning here, is the presence of, sorry, I clicked on the wrong one, presence of food safety net programs. These jump in when there is a price shock or there is a lack of food. And as you would expect, the richest countries are the ones who can afford the most. So they perform quite well again. And the sub-Saharan African countries are further towards the bottom of the list. Now you'll find that the scores differ less here compared to the consumer expenditure on food. Reason being, these are qualitative scores. We had to assess this in a qualitative way, meaning we have 4 points here we award for the difference in scale of the food program. But it is not a quantitative indicator, as is the share of expenditure on food, which can be measured in percentages. That's why you'll have a bit less variance in scores, but equally interesting to look at when thinking about resilience. So I think those two are the ones that capture best within our index what can be done or what is done around resilience in the short term. In the long term, I would point to two other indicators which fall under the category of availability, which talks about supply. And these two indicators are public expenditure on agricultural R&D, and here you'll find that Botswana actually comes first, together with Norway, spending 9% of agricultural GDP on research and development. It does better than some of the top performers in the overall index, including the United States and Switzerland, which is not even in the top 17. I seem to have an obsession with Switzerland today. Bottom of the list, if I can scroll down. Here we go. Are several countries, actually. We have, in alphabetical order, from Azerbaijan, ranging over Colombia, Denmark, Guatemala, Haiti, India, and so forth, approximately 30, 40 odd countries, all the way down to Zambia, who only spend 1% of agricultural GDP on R&D. And the interesting thing here is, unlike what we saw in the two indicators I showed before, where you could cluster the different regions, you saw that the wealthier nations were at the top and the less wealthy at the bottom. Here you see that it's actually more diverse. The picture is more mixed, and you have top performers from all regions and bottom performers from all regions. The last indicator I'm going to bore you with is agricultural infrastructure. Again, thinking about resilience in the long term, agricultural infrastructure is composed of 3 sub-indicators. They look at crop storage facilities, so where can you store, say, wheat for bad days. Road infrastructure, referring to how easy is it to get the goods from point A to point B. And port infrastructure refers both to imports and exports of food. These measures, obviously infrastructure takes time, that's why I think we have to think about it in the long term. And on these measures, sub-Saharan African countries, as you would imagine, do slightly less well than, say, the wealthier countries, meaning that there is more need to invest in infrastructure to get up to the standards required. That is all I wanted to say about the indicators themselves. As for the workbook, there are many more functionalities that I haven't mentioned that are worth looking at in here. I'm just going to show you one more before I end my session. And this is the country profile. What it shows you on a bigger screen than this is, I'm going to select Ethiopia just because we're here. It shows you the performance. There's a triangle, for those who can see it, there's a triangle sort of towards the middle of the screen. It shows Ethiopia's performance in blue, the top performance on each category in a dotted green line, and the worst performer in a dotted red line. You'll see that Ethiopia is far from the best, but it's also not the worst performer. A chart which I personally find quite interesting is the one just below, which looks at food price inflation since it says 2000, but it actually the data starts here in 2001. What we're looking at is not the actual prices, but an index value. The index being 100 for the year 2000. So that's our starting point. And we see that we've reached a value of almost 600 for the year 2013. That is quite a lot. I mean, that's a five-fold increase over this period. You'll also see how there has been fluctuations. So between 2008 and 2009, we had a sharp increase, and then it flattened out, decreased again, flattened out, and started increasing again since 2011. So those are sort of stories you want to pick up, and you might want to reflect on when looking at the country profile. It also shows you where a country performs particularly well and less well. So Ethiopia does very well on the volatility of agricultural production. That's an indicator within the availability category, and under urban absorption capacity, which falls under the same category. And both measures, it scores more than 75 out of 100, so that's fairly good. On the other end of the spectrum, the weaknesses in Ethiopia, I have to scroll to the right here. Again, this is measured in scores, not in raw data. There are several measures here, some pertaining to availability, some to affordability, gross domestic product per capita, so GDP per capita, and some to our last category. And it's actually the three indicators here where Ethiopia needs to improve. That's diet diversification, protein quality, and micronutrient availability. Okay. I think I'll cut it off there. Pamela's telling me I've spent enough time boring you. So if you have any further questions on this, I'm available after the panel. Please come forward and speak to me. Thank you.